you very much, and certainly looking forward to the conversation. I'm the founder and managing partner, as well as CEO of Cyber Capital Partners. We work with early stage, both on the technology side and on the professional service side, cybersecurity businesses, typically that start off in the federal space and migrate into one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So really looking at what is the intelligence community and the Department of Defense as the leaders of cybersecurity. How do you take those technologies, how do you take those services and apply them to the rest of the ecosystem? If you don't mind, what I'm going to do is share my screen, run through a quick set of slides, introduce the panel, and then we're going to talk predominantly about what is the state of cybersecurity, what are the investment opportunities, and what's the call to action. And Marty, before I go too far, I know we're a little bit behind schedule, and a couple of the panelists have a hard stop by 11:30. So I want to make sure that if we go until 11:30, that works for you.
Take the full-time schedule, yes.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to present that. So we've got a fantastic panel. Alyssa Gus is a blockchain expert. She's an entrepreneur and coach. I'll do a much deeper introduction of each of the panelists. Greg Pepus is a cybersecurity solution architect. He is a founder of FUTURA Cyber. He was also an instrumental part of the InQtel team. Suzanne, hold on a second, I apologize. Suzanne Kecmer is the CEO of SKB Capital. Suzanne has a fantastic background in both buy-side and sell-side cybersecurity transactions. She was the head of corporate development for Raytheon, and she brings a world of expertise in cybersecurity innovation. So going from there, I want to talk real quick about the fact that we've been attacked, our critical infrastructure sectors have been attacked in a unique way this year. And it's the first time as citizens that we're not just talking about having our data stolen, we're having disruptions of the economy, we're having disruptions of our daily lives. And what that actually means is we're disrupting the US national security supply chain. When thinking about how has the government tried to defend the United States, you know, we're a democratic capitalist society. So we don't have the same privilege of dictatorship that Russia and China have, Iran and North Korea have. And so we've got to figure out how to have a consolidated effort between the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the civilian agencies, and then the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So what's happened is the first phase was rolling out from the NSA and US Cyber Command across all federal agencies. Then legislation started regulating the largest organizations in the most critical sectors, financial services, healthcare, energy, et cetera. And then we started seeing medium-sized businesses in around 2015. And we'll talk about this a lot more, but CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, is the first time that we're seeing a group of small businesses actually being required to comply with this. And we're now at a spot where there's this big call for a public-private partnership. So the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, a subdivision of the Department of Homeland Security, very specifically calls for sector-specific partnerships because the government can't do it without industry. Biden's executive order on May 12th also calls for a much closer relationship with industry. When we think about the size of the cybersecurity spend, you know, it's projected to be $187 billion in 2021, but the reality is CMMC is adding $30 billion of new requirements. The executive order, the 115 cybersecurity bills, the infrastructure bill that has just been passed, you know, are introducing massive new funding streams. So when we're thinking about how does this public-private partnership work, you've got the regulations, which is the government's stick. But in reality, we need the government to fund the transfer of capabilities from the government into industry. That includes the research and development, it includes test and evaluation. We have many underfunded organizations that don't have the resources to actually secure their facilities. So we need tax credits, rebates, and grants. And then we are massively short globally, but specifically in the United States, on having a quality cyber workforce, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And then this is just a primer for the discussion. In the cybersecurity executive order, there were a bunch of very specific calls. The zero trust architecture, investing in both the technology and the personnel, integrating security into development at the beginning, not the end, doing continuous authentication, making sure that we're protecting the software supply chain, and really promoting the software bill of materials. So going back, I'm going to escape here and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And so now let me introduce our three panelists. Alyssa Gus is a blockchain expert, entrepreneur and coach, as well as a Virginia State delegate. As the CEO and co-founder of WishKnish, Alyssa brings blockchain to market through a distributed ledger technology that provides transparency and accessibility, as well as accountability. Through Lisa's entire career of working in technology and as an entrepreneur, Lisa sees firsthand the challenges encountered by underrepresented entrepreneurs across multiple verticals and developed tools to inspire transformational innovation. Lisa speaks English, Russian, and Uzbek, got her undergraduate from University of Louisville, and has proven a valued leader to many entrepreneurs and aspiring authors and content creators. Greg Pepus has a long career as a solutions architect, team leader, and entrepreneur. As chief solution architect and co-founder at FUTURA Cyber, Greg leads product technical design and corporate strategy in the field of cybersecurity products. Highlights of Greg's career include supporting federal and commercial customers, liaising with commercial systems integrators for In-Q-Tel, developing advanced screening capabilities at US Customs, as well as a stint in England. Greg's field of expertise is expansive, ranging from key management and cybersecurity to unmanned aerial systems to biometric recognition systems. Greg did his graduate studies at George Washington University, getting his master's in information systems, and has an undergraduate degree from the University of Florida in business and economics. Suzanne Kecmer has a distinguished track record of building next generation capabilities for the national security market. She's taken her career at Raytheon along with her Washington, D.C. and New York investment banking and has applied that to global defense and intelligence innovation. Suzanne has deep cybersecurity expertise, having served as a member of the bipartisan CSIS Cyber Policy Task Force to identify new U.S. policies for cyber rapid innovation and implementation, led many sell-side cyber transactions, and led Raytheon's corporate acquisition strategy on cyber. She is also a published author on cybersecurity matters. Suzanne received her BA in International Affairs from Lafayette College, as well as an MBA from Columbia University. So now I'm going to give each panelist a brief opportunity to discuss their organization. I'll start with Lisa. Lisa, I'm interested in hearing much more about WishKnish, particularly around the security applications.
Well, while WishKnish has first come about in 2016, to tackle a very specific problem, something that we have observed firsthand, which is creeping e-commerce monopolies and online privacy concerns. We realized that it's really impossible to deploy a distributed ledger technology without thinking about its security applications, because so much of the trust required by a distributed system exists on the edge of the value chain, with the end users and devices connected to the ledger rather than some centralized core. Adding multiple layers of security was critical. Really, the ethos of blockchain is you don't trust one person. You don't really trust anyone. You do trust everyone. After all, when you cannot rely on a centralized mediator to decide who is right and who is wrong, you need to give those edge users the power to perform their own degree of heavy lifting, where it comes to hashing, signing, validation, and consensus. So our distributed ledger is a little bit different from mainstream blockchains like Ethereum, because we are constructing it in a nonlinear directed acyclic graph, as we're calling it, relying on, and I'm kind of going a little technical here, on quantum resistant one-time signature schemes. Which actually means we are keeping the target moving. And so that's how we're calling ourselves quantum resistant. You can actually reach for pretty much any address, and you probably would crack it. Hell, SHA-1 has fallen already But what we're talking about here is moving the target. On top of this, we're also featuring a very robust permissioning system, meaning we allow for full control over who gets to see the data, write the data, for how long, and whether the access attempts are actually logged. But if you ask me as a non-technical person, our biggest claim to fame is the ease of use, because I think we're going to be talking here about really the need to make cybersecurity accessible and really solving the inefficiencies in the market and shortcomings in the market that exists today. And so we are trying to do is make sure that there is really a low barrier to entry as to how easily you can interact with the ledger and how easily you can secure it. To this end, I think we're really focusing on a no-code way to secure yourself, secure, as we call it, the horses in the barn, and make sure that they're staying there and not being rustled.
Right. All right. Well, fantastic. And Greg, FUTURA Cyber provides data storage solutions for federal customers. Tell us more about the company.
So we were formed in 2019. Our CEO, Jim Geary, was very early on at RSA number 14. And so we have a real breadth and depth, in terms of cybersecurity across the board. We've been very focused on encryption key management, cryptography management in general, as well as things like blockchain and machine learning. We've developed a new product to manage self-encrypting drives without having to buy an expensive enclosure to do it. So you don't have to go to IBM, HPE, and those companies. And the benefit of that is that now you can get a relatively inexpensive piece of software to manage your disk drives. And the benefit is these disk drives are the core of our data at rest. And the data at rest is a key component of some of the core security issues that we face today, and those technologies aren't being managed. So we focused on that as a company, and we've developed a very new product, came out in January, and we are also working in things like low-code, no-code automation. We're working in technologies such as separation kernel that give you a very secure cloud environment, secure virtualization that really minimize side channel attacks. So we really are kind of knee deep in some of the core technologies. Our next generation technology area will be a combination of what we're doing for self-encrypting and federally FIPS certified drives, to go to IoT and to learn about the IoT vulnerabilities to attest to their trustworthiness without having to have any special code on those devices. So big implications in IoT and in industrial control systems. So that's so the company is really focused in those areas. We are also doing work in the analytics space and machine learning, going so far as natural language processing, particularly on the machine learning transformer side with some of the new technologies that are coming out from OpenAI and Google Brain and things like that. Again, they all tend to focus back towards the cybersecurity area to help secure a particular facet of what an enterprise might be doing.
Well, fantastic. Suzanne, your corporate development skills are extraordinary, particularly in cybersecurity. Your firm, SKB Capital, provides advisory services to investors and strategic acquirers. I'd enjoy learning a lot more about SKB and also your view of the world these days.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to start SKB Capital about 4 years ago now. I really saw, well, my days at Raytheon, you can't unsee what you've seen in the classified space. And, I saw a lot of wonderful emerging tech, not only inside the labs at Raytheon, but also across the United States and also globally. But I didn't see, for my banking space, really a safe house, if you will, for people to have the strategic patience to spend time with these management teams, put a really strong business development capability around it, business strategic advisory board, and a real financial path to taking something that's, a onesie twosie in a garage and get it operationally on the battlefield. And, I guess it's no secret these days, and you can even just look at the front page, right? But we really need to find a way to fast pace getting these emerging technologies out, not only in the government space, but in the critical infrastructure space. So that's where I've spent my time, and I'm working not only cyber on the government side, but interestingly, seeing a lot of moving these best practices out to critical infrastructure, whether it be in the medical device space or fintech or data security, et cetera, and food security. So, we're seeing that, these are common problems, right? And there's ways that this government has invested in these technologies for many, many years. Your timeline on that chart that you kicked this off with, Jayson, this was very apropos. But also, a sigh goes out, right? We've been doing this for almost 10 to 15 years. Let's pick up the pace.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was the big driver for SKB Capital. And again, focusing on fundraising, sell sides, strategic development, and really just scaling really advanced tech to support national interest.
So this book is Ghost Fleet by P.W. Singer and August Cole. And, the panel that we're talking about today is around security and defense, and what the book really talks about, and it's a fiction book, but in the vein of Tom Clancy. But it really talks about how there is no national security without cybersecurity. Every single part of our weapon systems, every part of our national security supply chain is built around legacy infrastructure, capabilities that Russia and China have been exploiting for the past 15 years. We're looking at the fact that artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computing, cybersecurity, they're all interrelated. We're in an advanced information race with China and Russia. In fact, it is said that whatever country establishes themselves as the winner of this information race by 2030 will dominate the world by 2100. So the question for the panel is, how do you think the U.S. is positioned to win this race? And Suzanne, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go through.
Well, again, I think you've heard a little bit of my frustration is there is a lot of advanced technology that's out there, particularly on the offensive cyber side, that has been kept at an arm's length. And there's been some contracting vehicles that have been deployed in order to kind of fast pace getting these small businesses an entree into this market. But from a huge macro perspective, where is the offensive cyber community with policy development, right? And where are they setting the huge national strategy and vision for global implementation, as she said, would permeate every aspect of this. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to do more, and finding ways to not circumvent the primes, but to find ways to get this technology more pervasive inside these large, not only cyber standalone contracts, but also embedded in future national security builds, whether it be a missile program, a satellite program, etc.
Lisa, do you want to weigh in on this?
Actually, absolutely. In fact, it's a little bit of a pet project for me. When you think about Switzerland, right, it's a country that has positioned itself as a non-violent, non-participatory kind of group, and yet every single member of every single citizen has been military trained. And so I think that's what we really need to do with the US. I don't want us to really encroach on other people's freedoms and countries and so forth. But I feel like if the training is sufficiently given to and access to tools is given to every, at least organization, if not every individual member, we'll be in a lot better shape to tackle 2030. So that actually is also going to probably filter into any of those Luddite CEOs that we are worried about. They don't need to be themselves making decisions on cybersecurity, but they need to be at least educated enough to know whom to go to when they do need to make those decisions.
Yeah,
Which is why,
that's
as a
right.
company, we actually focused on making our technology available and, in fact, easy to use on something like a Raspberry Pi. In fact, we are looking to partner with the Raspberry Foundation to create this mesh of trust across the US and give those tools to everybody, at least to explore, if not to become proficient in.
Yeah, fully agree with that. And I like that mission of yours. Greg, what do you think?
Well, I think at least touched on the topic, hitting the nail on the head with the C ring in most companies, that they don't, in my opinion and experience, they don't have a good feel in most companies at the senior executive level for what cybersecurity is, what it means to the company, and how it can impact it. A lot of that is education. And we had some discussions the other day when we were preparing for this about, perhaps a reverse journeyman type situation for the C-ring, where they would bring in expertise or perhaps go hold jobs temporarily within their own organizations that help with these functions. But I think even at the board level, there's a lack of understanding. So the more we can do to educate the senior executives and board and the companies about the risks, about how important it is, the more willing they'll be to free up the fingers on the purse strings. And that really goes into the government. I would just comment that, having worked at InQtel and several other innovative government efforts, the government is interested in innovation. To quote a friend of mine, they seem to be more like innovation tourists, though, and they haven't really bought in extensively over time into the real hard innovation that would bring small companies in and raise the level of awareness about cybersecurity. So I think the good thing for this kind of family office discussion is that you've got to work to raise the awareness. You've got to look for those government programs, and you've got to bring understanding to decision makers, because without that, I go all the way up to Congress. I still think there's a tremendous lack of awareness, even in Congress, about the implications of cybersecurity. So I think it's, I hate to say this, but I think it's an educational issue, a very core educational.
Yeah, and as moderator, I'll try not to inject too much of my own opinion in the discussion. I think we're woefully challenged, and we've got to get quite serious about this. We have a lack of consistency from federal agency to federal agency. We've got our cities are being attacked consistently. Tulsa, Oklahoma is still down from their May attack. They don't have all their citizen services back up and running yet. We're looking at many under-resourced organizations. As you were talking about, that C-suite, the board, the CEO, they need to be setting the direction of cyber strategy. However, typically it's in the CIO, the CISO's hand. And then you've got the CFO who's trying to balance, the budget and make sure, the company stays afloat. So you've got all of these challenges and just this onslaught of attack from our four largest adversaries. So I think we are here to ring the bell and say it's time for us to get serious. Randy, you happen to be off of mute, so I'll ask you to just go on mute there. So we don't get the background noise. As we continue forward here, the discussion goes to CMMC. So Katie Harrington developed the cybersecurity maturity model certification requirements for the defense industrial base. This is the first time that the government has required cybersecurity compliance for businesses of all sizes within a particular sector, not just the enterprise and mid-sized organizations. Greg, what do you see as the impact of the CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model certification? What do you see the impact on federal contractors?
Well, I think the big guys are, particularly in the intelligence and defense space, are already they already have a pretty big infrastructure. I think the real impact will be positive and negative will be for small companies. The cybersecurity maturity model is appropriately named. It's about maturity. And as you pointed out, most businesses are woefully inadequately immature. Even integrators and consulting firms in the government that are small startups that, claim to be cybersecurity companies, if you went and looked at their capabilities internally, you would probably be maybe not surprised, but amazed at their woefully inadequate security.
Right.
So I think it's a mixed bag, CMMC. I think it's going to take time. The good news is you don't have to get there until about 2025 in terms of really being fully accredited. In the meantime, if you're interested as a corporate entity in becoming a contributor towards the accreditation process, you can get certified to become an accredited reviewer of CMMC. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but I think it's going to be a long road to hoe. And just to be clear, so everybody understands, CMMC is just a formalization of things that, particularly in the intelligence community and defense, government agencies conform to NIST standards such as 800-171 for cryptography, 800-53 for controls on computer systems, to make sure they are adequately locked down. Nobody can break into them from an identity management. You have to use password control. You've got to change your passwords. You've got to use encryption keys. There's all sorts of things. This is where new technologies such as zero trust come in. And so CMMC is really a driving mechanism to formalize the implementation at a commercial level for security, for proper security. And frankly, whether you're a government company, related business, or you're just working out in the regular economy and finance and healthcare and whatnot, you should really be looking at CMMC now. And it goes to the heart of what we've been saying about being prepared for cybersecurity. People actually went through the curricula that is starting to emerge, and by the way, has not even been fully implemented yet by the CMMC Defense Industrial Based Organization that's managing it. But if you follow that and you participate in and you prepare your organization, you'll be light years ahead of anybody else today, because that gives you the cornerstone, and eventually you'll be able to get your company certified as CMMC level 1, 2, or 3, which gives you varying levels of capability in the cybersecurity space. But it really is a good framework and outline. I think it's going in the right direction. I think it's very early days. Right now, it's a pretty mixed bag.
So along that, and I'm going to go to Suzanne with this. We saw on Andy's slides from talking about the size of the mid-size impact to GDP. So let's just extrapolate that and say, of the 300,000 civilian and defense government contractors that may very well have to, participate, which represents a $30 billion annual spend. Greg just talked about the fact that, the Raytheons of the world, they're already ahead of the game, right? They're setting up their security posture. But if 2/3 of this market are not to get to a level of cybersecurity required until 2025, what do you think of the, what do you think of that pace? What do you think of the government's sense of urgency to this national crisis?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I was going with Suzanne on that, but I'll give you an opportunity to jump back in.
No, well, I agree with a lot of what Greg was saying. I mean, I think that, frankly, and I was sitting at Raytheon 10 years ago, right? And we could not push all of this down to the sub-suppliers and even, further down into the supply chain, because nothing was going to come back up, right?
Right.
So, frankly, we're 10 years behind. I'd push it to even 15, okay? And I think that there's two critical things we're going to think about, because there are going to be winners and losers here. One way or another, either you're not going to get picked up or you're going to get hacked and you're out of business, right?
So you're saying if you're the government contractor and you're insecure, you're not going to be able to pick up your next government contracts.
No, eventually you will not. And I think that there are going to be big winners and losers. I think that the CMI overall framework is just that, right? It's almost the lowest common denominator that we need to secure to. So if you are built, if you are a small business and you are working in advanced development of your product and you're developing to that standard, you're already way behind. Okay, right? So you got to be projecting threat after next to even be viable going forward. And so I think that that's super important. And if the small business and investors don't understand that, that's truly where the investment opportunity is. And when you have that right answer, you're in a position to usurp maybe that larger supplier in the food chain, if you will.
And Lisa, you talked about low code, no code. Looking at the responsibility of the prime to protect the classified information or the controlled unclassified information. How do you see blockchain being part of that solution? How do you see low code, no code being part of the driver of success?
Well, the thing is, we are all worried about how we can afford to be compliant with cybersecurity, right? And it's not something we really want to focus on. We are looking to drive business. And unless we are a cybersecurity company for whom it's a primary business, I mean, what we're looking for is something that we can implement that would be compliant, that it would serve to protect us and our subs as simply as possible. I mean, when we came into the blockchain space, it was not really unique to actually want to hire a developer.
Hey guys.
Yeah. At like 300,000 or so, right, a year, a LA developer who's certified in working in Ethereum. And that was one of the reasons I think there was so much hype, yet so little success done around like 2016, 2017, because who could afford a serious developer who would charge as much? So what we're talking about here is actually making it affordable for someone who is not a developer, or at least a blockchain developer, to come in and implement it for all the way down the supply chain and the value chain, really. And that's why we focused on low code. I mean, we're looking at, in general, like 80% of the code by 2024 potentially being created by non-developers. Why should cybersecurity and or blockchain be any different?
So I'm going to jump us into the labor supply chain, and we've got about 15 minutes left in our allotted time. U.S. cybersecurity labor shortage. We've got 3.5 million open positions globally. We've got 650,000 in the U.S. alone. Entry-level positions are getting paid $90,000 a year. If you've got a clearance, you're coming straight out of college making $120,000 a year, and you're probably jumping from job to job every 3 to 9 months. I mean, what we see is a tenure of a chief information security officer is about 26 months. Lisa, I'm going to come back to you. How do you see us solving the workforce challenge?
Well, first of all, I would say education. And not to say like educating people in college, but educating them about where there are gaps really in the workforce. Maybe going as back as high schools or even middle schools to get kids interested in where their careers would be. And I think we're not really focusing enough. Our education system is tailored to a common denominator. So, we are learning about things that we might not necessarily need to, and we should have them for general experience, but we should start focusing on where our careers are going to take us, and maybe even focusing our parents on that. And secondly, I think being able to share positions, especially in senior management, might be interesting, and thus give access really to a larger pool of applicants and larger pool of those with know-how to participate and fill those gaps until we train up the younger generation.
Yeah, and so China graduates 1 million high school students a year with a concentration in cybersecurity, right? We do 10,000. Suzanne, how do we as a country look at cybersecurity the same way that we look at STEM?
I think that we have to look at these models differently and rely more on these cybersecurity, these private cybersecurity firms where you've got rock star cyber talent that these younger kids want to learn from and build out teams to work together in environments where, you know, the focus is on the problem and not, you know, bureaucracy and a huge job description or you know, trying to even find somebody that you're supposed to talk to about these jobs in the government. So I think that, you know, it's just a completely different environment and completely different skill set, and that the government's going to have to start getting more comfortable with outsourcing this type of work to this set of companies that are able to recruit, retain, and train this talent into completely world class in ways that, you know, we just don't even have the time to consider
Right.
it anymore.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, we did this with accounting, right? We created an entire world of CPAs and got that to a point where every firm in the country knows whether or not they need audited financials. And I certainly think that, you know, over a 15, 20-year future period, we'll get to maturation. But, you know, Greg, what do you see? Like, you were in QTEL. You've been part of many different groups of innovation. What do you see as the ways to, you know, accelerate the education, the adoption of technologies, et cetera?
So I think it has to start in early in the school system. STEM is being pushed this way now, you know, from elementary school on forward. And I think, like STEM, I think you have to start there and start adding, you know, awareness of computer vulnerabilities, because the kids grow up with all this technology, so they're very comfortable with it, but they don't grow up with somebody whispering in their ear about, oh, make it safe too. And so there's very little awareness unless somebody changes that thought pattern. I think, like we did for teachers, to get teachers in the, you know, across America, you could do a national service program for cybersecurity, and that, you know, a set of volunteers, maybe you work in the government. I think the military services could really foster more demand at the military occupation specialists, particularly if the government and Congress will get behind it. I think at the state and local level, there can be more grants and more focus on education there. I think just along, you know, just along the entire spectrum of our society, we have to get more on a warlike footing, because it is a war. I mean, it just is, and we're going to get crushed by it if we don't get ahead of it in some way. And we've been having these discussions in my milieu for decades now about how to get people educated and interested, because interest is everything. So it can be done. It's not a new thing for us. You mentioned accounting, teaching, all those professions. There are mechanisms to make people interested and get them aware and drive them forward in those areas. And then I think, of course, entrepreneurship will and commercial desires will drive a lot of it too. But I still think in the main eye of society that people aren't aware of it yet.
Yeah, and I love the idea of a AmeriCorps for cybersecurity. You know, some kind of scholarship program. You go get recruited out, right, and make it a career path and make it where those kids can get their security clearances as part of that, or at least an entry level security clearance. That would certainly help solve this entire issue. We've got a lot more. What were you going to say?
Cyber summer camp.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a lot more issues that we're going to have to jump right past. Resource constraints being one of them, you know, the supply chain being a major part of it. Suzanne, I want to ask you, what do you see as valuations today? What do you see as opportunities for the family offices on the call to really pay attention to in terms of opportunity and such a complex field? You know, how do you steer an investor towards something that they'll know how to manage?
Guys, can I just jump in here with one question before Suzanne goes?
Yeah.
Yep, great, perfect. So my question is, I have some background in tech, is why can't we just re-architect some of these cybersecurity issues away, right? I mean, do we really need to be connected to, a lot of these countries, or is there some way to kind of block these countries or
Well,
what?
yeah, so you're talking about wholesale infrastructure change from the beginning, to the end, right? And that is, how insecure is the internet? These devices,
Incredibly, it was built insecure, right?
right? Our entire industrial controls systems, our SCADA networks, our operational technologies built off of devices that were designed in the 50s, right? And maybe they were designed in the 90s, but they're expensive. So for the first time in eons, we have a material infrastructure bill that seems to be ready, but we don't have shovel-ready projects.
Mhm.
So your question, I think, is fundamentally the right question. Built into DevSecOps, built into the device itself. It can't be put into an environment without being tested. But how many years, how many decades is that going to take us to do that wholesale CapEx refresh? So that, I think that leads perfectly to Suzanne. Where if you were an investor with $100 million, where would you be putting that money?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I said this yesterday when we were prepping for this, but I've been looking at the aerospace and defense space since 1997, so I don't get into how many years that is, but I have not seen a better environment since maybe directly after 9/11 with brand new tech. But anytime where this has been a space where small private investors could really make a big difference in such a barbelled industry that has been so heavily weighted towards large companies, large infrastructure. And there's definitely pockets within the cybersecurity realm on the end-to-end spectrum of things where you can find areas that there's advanced tech development that's ready to go, that's already being implemented in government. But the real opportunity is taking that same tech, maybe adding 10 or 15% more development, but pushing it into critical infrastructure, whether it be finance, healthcare, energy, whatever it is. There's tremendous opportunity there. And most of these small companies don't have the big business development arms. So there's a lot of market share left to be had in the government space with these technologies, but not only here in the US, but globally as well. So there's a tremendous lot of opportunity here that I just have not seen in 15, 20 years.
And Lisa, I'll ask you in terms of blockchain and other technologies. They're incredibly complex. How do you suggest that investors get their hands around it?
Well, I think that blockchain has been really kind of sent all in a lot of investors' minds into the realm of financial space. So I think we need to really focus on educating investors and even lay people that what we are looking at is a fundamentally new way to do internet. And I think it actually goes into Marty's question about how to secure and if not necessarily rebuild, but reinforce the existing systems. And I think that's what the investors need to look at and then identify within that large swath of what is possible, what really interests them. To me, it's supply chain. It's always supply chain. That's where the focus of blockchain should be. But then, it could be a supply chain of highly secure data traveling. So there are a lot of ways to delve deep when you're forming your investor thesis.
And Greg, I'm going to ask you to hop into this and the next question, and that is, what's the call to action here? And so we've got investors on the call. We've got Andy with his private credit. What do you see as the needs of the community, the needs of the United States, and the call to action of the investors?
Well, I think funding novel and new technologies remains very important, but I would say the number one thing on the government side, which is where my head is at most of the time, is getting the government engaged in ways particularly in the procurement side, where they're just so archaic still after 35, 40 years of trying to change. They just haven't managed to do it. But trying to engage them in new ways of doing business with the government, bringing in small technologies, because otherwise you are stuck with the big guys and they will not bring in new technologies. They're risk adverse, not typically. Having worked extensively with the Lockheeds and the SAICs and the Raytheons, they'll bring new technologies in certain circumstances, but if small companies want to come in and build a space, it's very difficult. So I think in terms of investment, helping government-focused companies use government resources and get engaged, in ways to leverage those dollars is important, but we have to find new ways and encourage our lawmakers to make new ways of engaging with the government and eradicate a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork that still exists. And I think, the intelligence community, Defense Department, health services, law enforcement, they really need our help. They need small businesses' help and ideas and innovation. And we've got to get the government out of this kind of innovation tourism mode into innovation adoption. And so there's a way to get investment involved in those. And that's all a matter of incentive on the economic side. You just have to find the right incentives. I wish I could tell you more. I don't have time.
Well, yeah. And I certainly have, I built Cyber Capital Partners around the thesis that there needs to be a facilitator between the government and industry, because everybody's motivated to be secure. We all have different means of going about it. If I was an investor today, I would certainly be hiring a firm to help me do the due diligence on the companies. I'd want to know their supply chains. I'd want to make damn sure that I had evidence that the acquisition target or the investment target was serious about doing due diligence, not just on the target, but their supply chain, and that there was some level of security requirements in place. If I'm a family office, I'm dependent upon an investment advisory or a sub-advisory that specializes in these types of advanced technologies. But I think there's got to be, I think there's got to be a wholesale sea change in this country, or else we're going to lose. And it could, it sounds dramatic, but we're talking about change of Western civilization. And if we don't, as a country, get our government leaders, our industry leaders, our politicians, and our investors all thinking about, we need to standardize, we need to educate, we need to mobilize, and we need to do this in a fast fashion. 2030 is not even 2 election cycles away. So we don't have a lot of time to fix this. So with that, I'll wrap up the panel. I appreciate everybody's participation. I think some of us have time to take a few questions, but I know others of us have to go. So Marty, do you want to lead the Q&A?